on. That will help me understand how my feed is doing. Carolyn, thank you. You're not frozen. Okay, fantastic. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And Brandy, if you would do me a huge favor and just go back to the agenda title for the previous agenda item, tab 5. Perfect. Okay, so I wanted to just, since I lost connectivity, I wanted to just make sure I closed the loop in seeing if there was any public comment, and also if we had any comments from the Spanish translation service. So Justin, any public comments on tab 5?
I see no public comment at this time.
Y tampoco hay comentarios en la línea telefónica en este momento. Gracias. Oh, sorry, I meant there's no comments in the Spanish line at this time. Thank you.
I do not know how you process 2 languages in real time. That's amazing. Thank you. Okay, very good. So what we can do now is shift to the next agenda item. And what I wanted to do was to kind of do like a check-in with you all. So for this particular item, we had planned to continue the discussion that we had started last month on public engagement best practices. But we've already heard a lot of very heavy things from you all regarding public engagement. And what I want to make sure we do is we approach this item in a way that is responsive to what you would like to get from it. So we had framed out some discussion questions and we placed those in the PowerPoint presentation. But I want to make sure that when we approach this topic that we do so in a way that you are able to talk about what you want to talk about. So I wanted to propose, or I wanted to ask, I wanted to poll the group essentially to see, you know, are we fatigued on this topic? Like, are we all trying to process? Do we need some time to, you know, think more about this and come back fresh at our next meeting? Would you like to cover some of the questions? Or do we want to just take this time to do like open-ended feedback and discussion? So that's kind of the 3 options. I feel like option 1 would be to allow ourselves to take a break. Option 2 would be to cover any of the questions you're interested in covering. And option 3 would be to have, give folks the space to speak how they would like to on this topic and not be held to the questions. So I don't know if folks could maybe like put in the chat what their preference is or verbally let me know where you're at. Okay, so Rio is voting for option 1 and continuing this talk after we see the updates from Amar's presentations. I see some nodding heads on camera. Okay, I do want to, is there any roundtable member that wishes to make any remarks regarding public engagement best practices in this space right now?
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead first. I can go after.
I just wanted to say that I think what just happened is such a microcosm of the type of feedback and criticism and passion that we're going to be seeing as we do public engagement and best practices. And so I just, you know, want to like commend the commission for actively engaging in the conversation. And yeah, that's my only comment.
Thank you, Nayula. Tamika?
Yeah, I was just gonna say something very similar. I think what just happened was important and hopefully exactly the type of space you all want to create. And I hope someone other than Amar holds the weight of that, because I think often we hire folks of color, particularly women of color, in these equity roles, and they really are trying to move the ball forward within the systems they're in, and so they get a lot of that pushback. And I want to, you know, just thank her for holding that space for us. I think lesser folks would have gotten super defensive in the space, but also want to make sure everyone on the government side doesn't just see this as her job. And I also really appreciated, Jeannie, you jumping in there to provide that support in real time and to take some of that ownership in real time as a white woman. The only other thing I wanted to add was just this piece around best practices and pay. I think it's come up a lot. And I think, you know, as members, we got an email about pay, and I would just really, I know resources are limited, and even though transportation is always viewed as something that's better resource than perhaps other departments or parts of government, it's never enough, and it's particularly never enough for community. But I would just encourage folks to realize that when you invite everyone to a space as experts, and they are giving their time and their energies and their wisdom, then you should figure out how to compensate all of them. Asking them to then you know, be part of a competitive process where only some people get something, but that they have to do labor to get that, do extra labor to get that, I think is not a way to think about equity. And so I think sometimes we're really focused on equity outcomes, but we also have to think about the process, like equitable processes and the ways we get there. And I think, you know, I won't speak for every member of this roundtable. I'm gonna be okay without compensation, but I just want us to think about that when we're going to communities, you know, whether or not it is a grocery card or whatever it is. When people come to share something, they are providing expertise, and everyone should feel like they are getting something for that. And whether or not we are providing dinner and free childcare or whatever bureaucratic pieces we have to cut through, I think it's dangerous when and especially in something where folks are specifically selected, I think it's dangerous to say you all have value, but only some of you can be compensated for that value.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. Thank you, Tamika, so much for laying all that out. Yeah, just to echo all those points that Tamika just made, I want to start off with that. Definitely, I thought I found it a little bit off-putting to see a competitive process on that for the points that Tamika mentioned. And yeah, and then going back to, you know, having Amar present, and this is for any situation or even partnering up with CBOs on the ground. Like, I hope that agencies can understand that it is a big thing for people to stick out their necks on behalf of the agencies to help mend that trust. And there needs to be something to be said about that. You know, I've talked about this with many different people, but you know, there's not only the labor of actually doing the presentation or creating the materials or getting to the place, there's the emotional labor that comes with it, with having to process with all the aftermath when you go back home, right? And I think those are things that are very undervalued. And so yeah, to Mika's point, like definitely, like how does CTC, Caltrans, all of them, how do you all collectively spread that? Is particularly on the decision-making powers, right? The people who can pull the strings, because we've seen this over and over again, where people are put in these positions and they don't have any pull or power. So hopefully there's authentic power being provided, and the people who already have power are being put in these positions. So I definitely commend like the efforts that are made by Amar, Jeannie, and everybody here, because it's not easy to hear our feedback, but it's absolutely a necessary step. But it does come with like actual transformation. So just wanted to lift that up. And then again, just last thing is, again, thinking about CBOs, there is going to be that as well for CBOs sticking out their necks on behalf of agency if you hire them for the public engagement piece. I don't want to get too much into the public engagement piece, but you know, something to think about.
Naila, Tamika, Rio, thank you. Those points were all very, very well taken. And I think what we are hoping to achieve through this body, and I think just our three agencies trying to come together and really support one another. I think that we believe that this work is, you know, it's critical, it's way overdue. And so whatever, you know, Avital through her executive management, you know, Jeannie and Amar through their executive management, and commission staff through our commissioners and and executive management, we want this to be a very synergistic effort where it's elevated as a priority for all of our organizations, and that support, and in particular for the department, I think that becomes the resources to do this, so that the Caltrans Office of Racial Equity is not this tiny tugboat trying to pull a really big ship, and just making sure that this work is really integrated into all aspects of what we do, because that's how I believe you can spread the labor around. And I just want to especially thank Jeannie and Amar for being so willing to cover this topic. I feel like we are still getting into the groove of coming to these meetings prepared. We had short turnaround between April and this month, so we're looking forward to really digging in and coming back in July at a point where hopefully we can, in a lot of ways, pick up where we left off, but also really show that there's been this progress and consideration that we've done at the staff level between now and then. So I think at this point, I also did want to acknowledge the points that were made around compensation so that Roundtable members understand that we've taken those under advisement, and we really want to think through how we go about compensation in a manner that is properly valuing the expertise that we're seeking, and how we can figure out how to deal with the bureaucracy that goes along with the state contracting and utilizing resources. So I hope we can have a very robust conversation about that in the future. I feel like at this point I did want to do a little bit of a final check with folks before we kind of moved into our wrap up. Okay, not seeing anyone.
I did want to say that I think, I really feel like we reached a valuable point with Connie's, acknowledgement that the whole system is really broken fundamentally. And so I would love to find a way to continue to hear exactly how broken it's been, because I think having that opportunity to have it elevated at a level where it can be acknowledged and even, really heard is so valuable. I mean, there's also this assumption too that transit has to be just about vehicles. And there are so many people who, due to medical conditions, aren't able to leave their homes in the traditional way. So how do we work toward leveraging this energy into the other infrastructure that we need to be able to get folks truly to be able to truly access their communities? So I just, I really, there's so many things that I could share from this last year for me, myself personally, but I'm not going to do that because I acknowledge my own privilege within this system. So there's got to be a way though for folks who have really been harmed and or possibly lost their lives during this, this last year plus, beyond that even, due to a lack of transportation access. Transportation access is a major part, contributing factor to the health of folks in their communities.
Thank you, Russell. And Connie, today's your birthday. We should be giving you a gift, but I feel like instead you gave us a gift in, I think, really bringing us to a place where we could talk, just a very vulnerable place where we could have a conversation that I think just has needed to be had. And I think it will not be the first difficult conversation we have. And so thank you for gifting us on your birthday.
Thank you. And at the risk of stepping into Leslie's territory here, oftentimes when I go off on a rant about white supremacist meetings, I always tell people, remember, I was the mayor of a city and I held that gavel and I looked at people who were stressed and said, I'm sorry, you only have 3 minutes to talk. So it's a system that many of us have bought into. Some of us have the privilege of understanding the rules. But if you're really going to affect this, it's not about us teaching people the rules to come to your meeting, right? So, oftentimes people say to me, well, what would the meeting look like? And I start out by saying, well, this is what my meetings look like in tribal communities, right? Everyone comes into the room. We recognize that it may take some people longer to travel to that room than others. So we don't start the meeting until everyone we know is coming has arrived. And in the case of Caltrans, last chance grade is closed. And so if a tribal member hits that at the wrong time, it may be a 2-hour delay in that meeting right now. But we all wait because we know they're willing to make the journey. And then when they come into the room, we don't rush them. Everyone gathers food. And because we know they've come a long way, we feed them. And then we start by asking an elder to bless the meeting. And then we have the meeting, but we make accommodations for everyone there. And so, every culture has a different way of entering a meeting space. And so the concept of like having one consultant address all of these cultures is also problematic, because that consultant is just going to design what they think should be the rules for that table. And so that's why I keep saying maybe the answer is to pick the 6, and I know there could be more than 6, but pick the 6 topics you want to start for, and then ask yourself, what is the best way in each of those areas to enter the space? And normally, I was raised to like, let it all roll off and succeed in a white supremacist environment. But I'm like, just questioning George, day after the anniversary of George Floyd, whether it's worth just saying, maybe this effort, we try to do something different. We try not to just pick the people like me who can adjust and come in and get our points on the board, or use our influence to get that meeting, Maybe we really this time try to enter their space with you. So I'll stop there, and thank you for giving me the space to say that. But I've just been thinking a lot about it, and it's like I'm really exhausted in the equity spaces, because it's like let's start with the definition of equity, which we all never can agree to. So we really never get beyond that point, and so let's try to do something different here.
Thank you, Connie. I will say this. Challenge accepted. So we are, we're definitely going to take what we heard today, and our 3 agency staff are going to sit down and digest and figure out what we can bring back to you all in July to show that, we've heard and incorporated what you all have said, and just a general status update on where we can land on some of these things and what the trajectory might be for where we could land in the future on them. So I think at this point, I did just, I wanted to just thank everyone. I wanted to identify some, key takeaways and action items that we've noted. We definitely want to make sure that we can use our charter and this effort to identify how the roundtable can sustainably incorporate equity into actions, into decision-making processes, and really focusing on transformative solutions. We definitely heard that there is a need to move from an engagement or an empowerment model to one that really fosters culturally sensitive participatory planning, focusing on community leadership and co-empowerment. and, you know, really truly meeting communities and neighborhoods and individuals where they're at and being accountable for the feedback that we receive. I think we also want to touch on, you know, this desire to not lead with a definition of equity, but to try and approach it as a framework. So, you know, there's probably much more that we covered that'll be in our meeting notes that we'll make sure that we follow up on. But I did want to give folks an opportunity. Is there anything else that I didn't list out that you think is really, oh, something just popped into my mind. I wanted to acknowledge the ask for us to really think through our existing structures when it comes to engagement and be willing to sort of recognize where things aren't working. I think that's something that we as state agencies need to be constantly doing. So that's something that I feel like we can be thinking on between now and our next meeting. Did we miss anything else critical that someone wants to raise, just to make sure we don't miss it? And we can certainly go through our meeting minutes to make sure we catch everything. Okay, so not seeing anything in the chat, not hearing or seeing anyone come online. I wanted to make sure that we covered the agenda item for public engagement or for public comment before we wrapped. So at this point, I want to do a final check-in for public comment and as well as anything from our translation service. Justin?
Thank you, Laura. I am not seeing any public comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay. And anything on our translation service?
No public comments on the interpretation line. Thank you.
Okay. And then are we soliciting comments on our closed captioning line, the closed captioning feature? Or are we still figuring out doing that? Okay, sorry. We're still figuring out the technical aspect of that. Okay, so in terms of sort of next steps where we go from here, we're going to prepare summary notes from today's meeting. We're going to share them with all of you like we did last time. You know, all materials, the recording of this webinar will be posted on our website. And then our next roundtable meeting is scheduled for July 21st. At that meeting, we will bring back a revised draft charter, the equity framework, or a draft equity framework, and just in general, our reflections on the feedback that we heard today on all the different topics that we discussed. And then we do also anticipate beginning our discussion around the development of a standing equity advisory committee meeting in July. So with that, I will just ask for any final questions or comments from roundtable members. Do you have any? Okay. Thank you everyone for your time, your feedback today, and for just being part of this conversation. We sincerely appreciate it, and we will see you all in July.